I wonder how much. I wonder how much John Voight donated. John Voight and James Woods certainly donated to Kyle Rittenhouse's bail fund.
Probably.
That is so sick.
Yeah, probably.
On a totally unrelated note, do we still do drawing and quartering in this country?
I was imagining earlier, like when I found out that first of all, I was surprised. I guess I shouldn't have been surprised that they were able to raise whatever 10% or maybe even 5%. I'm not sure what, but 10% of $2 million, which is still a hefty sum of money.
Because of 10% bail.
That's usually how bail bondsmen work. Yeah. But I mean, I guess you have to have that amount of collateral against it as well. So, you know what I'm saying? So I don't know. I don't know what their house is valued at, but they may have put up even more than what's 10% of 2 million? 200,000?
Fucking 200 grand.
Wow,
yeah. Shit.
So yeah, I shouldn't be surprised that that they were able to do that. But no, but like I was thinking about it today, and I got to thinking about like I wouldn't be surprised. There's probably going to be a whole thing over the next couple months while he's out on bail, where they're like, I was imagining like them like talking about like someone shooting at their house, like maybe like I don't know if they do it themselves or maybe someone actually would, but like imagine like they feel that they're in danger and now they have to like we have to like keep Kyle safe and we have to like stay in hotels or like move someplace else, so like we have to continue like to receive donations. Like I could see what I'm saying is I could see that being even beyond the bail itself a continued grift. Like we have to protect Kyle at all costs.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the Antifa scum are after him.
Right.
That's exactly.
And they they should. I hope they are. Frankly,
because that would that would track, because like, you know, this is exactly how things happen, you know, in America, which is an event happens, there's a reaction to it, and then, you know, that behavioral change just sticks. Like the same thing that we've brought up a million times, Shane, that you talk about all the time with, like, you know, one guy tried to do something with his shoes on a plane. Now we all have to take our shoes off.
Right.
You know, when we go through to take a plane. Not that I'm going to take a plane in any fucking hurry, but still, yeah, it's the same. And of course, you know, because then we could just say it's well established. Oh, you know, Kyle Rittenhouse or whatever is being hunted by Antifa. Fucking fingers crossed. But you know, it's fucking crazy.
Well, I gotta share this with you guys, just on this topic. So we started talking about this just before we were recording, because I'd noticed that somebody named Ricky Schroeder, an actor, was like trending because it turns out that he donated a substantial amount to Kyle Rittenhouse's bail fund. And I was like, who the fuck is Ricky Schroeder? Because I kind of pride myself on having a encyclopedic knowledge of like nobody actors, you know what I mean? Like and weird movies and stuff. And I'd never heard of this guy. And I guess apparently he was like a child actor in the 70s and then in the 80s, I guess as a young man. He was on some show called Silver Spoons.
Okay.
That was like his big thing that
Okay.
I guess he was like as a young man. But in 1980, also as a little boy, I guess when he was 10, he was in a movie, which I'm assuming this is where this phrase comes from. The title of the film is Little Lord Fauntleroy.
No way.
And he plays Little Lord Fauntleroy.
Jesus.
In the movie.
This dude, he's 50 years old and he looks like an old boy. Do you know what I'm saying? Like he's got a youthful face, but he's weathered with hatred.
On Wikipedia, the section for his personal life, it just has 3 lines, and the first is when he was married and when he got divorced. Then a note about how last year he was arrested twice for domestic violence.
Oh, no.
And then the third one is in November 2020, it was reported that Schroeder was a major contributor to the bail fund for Kyle Rittenhouse. It's just like,
how much money does he have?
I don't know. I guess he made bank on TV and whatever that shows. I've like, this is rare that I can look at, you know, some obscure actor who's in a bunch of shit in the 80s and 90s, and I have never seen a single thing they've been in.
I've heard of Silver Spoon, but that's it. I've never seen it.
Oh, this fucking sucks. He directed and starred in the music video for one of my favorite songs of all time. Fuck. Whiskey Lullaby, as sung by Brad Paisley and Alison Krauss, two of my absolute favorite.
This is what you
canceled both of them.
This is what you get for liking music. It's only gonna disappoint you.
Can we not have something, dude? Like, can we not just have some purity? Is there anything pure that we can just enjoy without it being tied to some fucking, you know, fascist conspiratorial plot? Fuck.
Right. Well, it's funny. I've been watching like we got like basic cable. I've been watching Fox News and stuff. And it's funny, like at this point, probably thanks in part to the efforts of people like Jordan. Like when you watch like those primetime shows on Fox News, like it's like half of it is Mike Lindell, the My Pillow guy, and then the other half, it's like weird infomercial products. Like there's like almost like no big name like
Right,
mainstream corporations that like advertise on Tucker Carlson's show. It's just like the My Pillow guy, and then like a commercial for like brain supplements with like Seb Gorka in it. And like, I'm serious,
Yes.
not even exaggerating. And then like
his was a brain growth hormone because his head
right.
is so fucking
Right. Well, no, I didn't post it, but I took a picture. I got a picture of the screen when Gorka was on because it's him and he's standing between the two owners of the company, and I mean, he could fit both of them probably inside of him like a Russian doll. Like he's so much taller. He's so much taller, but also his head is just like he could fit like both of their average normal person heads inside his head. It's really astonishing.
He's
But,
a human
like
turducken.
the other type of commercial you see on Fox News all the time is like weird commercials about like just some specific, just strange like household product or something. And like I was watching, in fact, like one, it was called like the floppity fish or something. It was like a cat toy.
Oh,
It's like a fish and it's like electronic and it just like flops around and they play with it. And like the commercial was like adorable with like cats like playing with the floppity fish. And I was watching it and I was like if this is what's like, this is advertised on Tucker Carlson, like whoever owns this company probably like lives in a fucking compound in Montana and writes like threatening letters to abortion clinics or something. You know what I'm saying? Like whoever owns this is like the inventor or like owner of this product or something. Is probably a real right-wing psycho like Mike Lindell is.
a fucking joke. Goddamn Sebastian Gorka. What function does this guy have in our lives? How the fuck does he have a career doing what he does?
He you know, because he styles himself as doctor. I remember like really early on, I looked into him, and he has like a phony degree.
Yes.
That, and his like whole dissertation was that, you know, it's something in the vein of, you know, like all Muslims are inherently terroristic.
Right.
Or
Yeah.
something
Exactly.
Like that.
Yeah.
And so
yeah.
he.
What?
That's how
Muslims have a terrorism bone in their brain.
Right. Yeah. It was something you know, that kind of not particularly veiled cultural racism stuff, you know, where there's something endemic to that way of life or whatever that causes violence. And he would do like, I guess these like small little conferences and stuff, you know, that for the crowd that wanted to hear that kind of material and wanted somebody who had the kind of gravitas of like an academic, you know, in the same way that like, you know, part of Paul Joseph Watson's appeal, if there is any, is the fact that he's got a British accent. And
yes.
You know, in a very basic way, if you're like kind of just like a dumb guy, you look at that and you're like, oh, he must be smart because he's got an accent. It's the same thing with Gorka. He was one of my first blocks on here, and sometimes I had such a good time like with the troll that got him to block me, but like at the same time it was like 2 years ago and there's so much like Gorka material I've missed out because of that.
Same, bro.
But I remember he was like peddling he said something, you know, he posted some ridiculous thing, and then there was somebody in his replies that was like trying to sell stickers. They had like a sticker store online, and all the stickers were like you know, Blue Lives Matter, you know, Nazi shit, like, you know, that you might buy for your horrible father or whatever, or, you know, like I don't know like who's buying this, but it was like a sticker store that he had set up. And so then I replied to that guy and I was like, these are extremely poor quality stickers. And he got really mad. He's like, what are you talking about? And he was like, I've bought these stickers and they're really terrible. And so then like I had all of these like Gorkaites in my mentions then being like, you're a liar. Like, how do you know that? I was like, I'm a sticker aficionado and collector. I bought these stickers for their like commemorative value. And I was very disappointed to find out that they were quite poor. And they're like, oh yeah, well, if you have the stickers, like take a picture of them and show them. I was like, I can't because they're in my trash. and I'm not going to share my trash with you. Anyway, it ended up being this long thing where I was just insisting that I was like a sticker guy or whatever. I had fun with it, but then Gorka saw it and blocked me.
Jesus,
what a shame.
Am I dreaming that one of the three of us has spoken to Dr. Gorka himself?
Yeah, that's just in your dreams, dude. That's when you close your eyes, you see his head and you hear his voice.
Chris, you talked to him, right? Oh, Chris, are you muted or something?
Oh yeah, I am. Yeah, no, I have spoken to him. I'm sorry, I was muted. Yeah, I did it for Not Even a Show, Chris's show. Yeah, I called him.
Yes.
God, it's been over a year now. But yeah, I called him and spoke to him on the air. I was trying to do it again. I was talking to Chris. I would like to get him again. I tried a couple times a few weeks ago, but I couldn't get through. But yeah, I'll soon. I'll call him soon. We'll speak again shortly.
Can we? I'd love to hear it again. Can we insert it here?
And you will find out much, much more. Let's go to Chris in Richmond, who's got a very interesting question. Chris, line 3.
Hey, Dr. Gorka. It's an honor. Wonderful show so far.
Thanks.
I just want to say, in regards to the topic of that Fox News poll on impeachment, which seems like a bunch of BS to me, but I have a really quite an intelligent friend who happens to be pretty socially liberal. And, what he says is the biggest thing in conservative politics in 2019 is fear-mongering. Whereas on the other hand, I have this rather brilliant conservative friend who's a professor, in fact, and he's adamant that the biggest thing in conservative politics in 2019 is personal responsibility. Now, even though they're both brilliant, I don't tend to agree with either of them in this case, because for me, the biggest thing in conservative politics in 2019 is your head.
Yeah, I knew that was going to be what you...
Why is that amusing?
Why do you think that's funny, Chris?
What size hat do you wear?
But what? No, hang on. Leave the guy. Leave him on, Chris. Is that the best you can do, Chris? I mean, this is the same.
Dr. Gorka.
Why is that? But why do you care?
You're filibustering, Dr. Gorka. What size hat do you wear?
Why do you think what you are doing is amusing to anybody except people with a double-digit IQ like you, Chris?
I'm watching you on the live stream right now. I believe you need a wider angle lens to fit your entire head
Chris,
in the frame.
It's just not funny. You've got to try harder. That's the best you can do.
Nobody's satisfied around you. Not your girlfriend, not your sad friends in your basement, not the mother you live with. You've got to try harder, Chris. Thank you, and bye-bye.
Now when I was a young boy, about the age of 5, my teachers taught me I could be the greatest man alive. They told me I could change the world, be whatever I wanted to be. There was no one in the world like me. Every one of us was so unique. I'd not be an average man. No, sir, I'd be no average man. So I have those big dreams.
Welcome back, everyone, to Eat the Rich. This is a show about our political economy, late-stage capitalism, and the millionaires, billionaires, and multinational corporations hell-bent on staving off its death rattle. I'm Dwight, and today we have with us Shane.
Hi, guys.
I thought my my headphones worked. And we've got Chris.
Hello.
So this 2020 Thanksgiving special, I guess, is our second Thanksgiving special in the existence of this show. And we thought that, we enjoyed doing the Thanksgiving special last year, obviously, because, there's a bit of, festivity in the air, all of which is entirely absent from this year. And also, importantly, I think, to kind of have a larger conversation about some of the American stories that we were grown up with and were taught about, and the kind of myth surrounding surrounding the holiday and debunk them, talk a little bit about, the actual history of what happened, because it tends to be a very, very fucking whitewashed history that we're taught, especially in the, American public school system of which the three of us were educated from. So to get it started, I mean, I think obviously, firstly, there's just fucking so much that can be said, in the continuing American project about just the sheer and utter failure of our republic and institutions that are meant to safeguard us and make us available to have what few federal holidays we actually get. And obviously, all of that is upended, turned on its head, and made more difficult at the very least this year. So with that being said, we'd like to continue on the original project from last year of talking about some of the actual real history that lent itself to this holiday. So with that being said, I gotta be honest, I'm gonna talk about something to begin, and the question that I asked was, I know that we kind of don't really have, a real understanding of what the origins of Thanksgiving was. Obviously there wasn't this kind of bucolic sit down around a cornucopia between the Massachusetts Bay Colony Puritans and the Native Americans in this, in the area. That isn't exactly how it fucking went down. But the actual history and the story and events that precipitated the beginning of Thanksgiving in the Massachusetts Bay Colony, I didn't realize personally until I looked into it this week out of just, curiosity and looking for something to share with you. I didn't realize that it was this dark, frankly. I think I should mention before we discuss this that, often the source material that we look at is, whitewashed, is published by historians that oftentimes are white. This might have something to do with the fact that, European settlers and colonists came into this country and massacred 110 million Native Americans in North America. So that might have something to do with it. Again, I'm still learning the history, but I think I'm going to read from something here from a Philly Mag, in fact, and this is an article from 2012 by Christopher Moroff, and I'm going to read it in its entirety because it's not that long, and I think it's just something that just deserves, it's just the source material on its own, and then we can have a discussion about it afterwards. And the name of it is, "Should We Rename Thanksgiving National Ethnic Cleansing Day?"
Yes.
The real origin.
But
yeah, I mean, yes. The answer is yes. The real origin of Turkey Day is a tale we'd rather not hear. And it reads as follows, guys. Every fifth grader thinks she knows the story of Thanksgiving. It goes something like this. In the winter of 1620, a small group of Puritan separatists from England settled in Plymouth, Massachusetts, hoping to start a new life free from religious persecution. Hint right there, they were fucking weirdos. The Pilgrims couldn't have arrived at a worse time. The harsh winter, aggravated by diseases of deficiency like scurvy, wiped out nearly half of them by the time they had their first contact with local Wampanoag tribe in March of 1621. The natives, led by their chief Massasoit, signed a peace treaty with the settlers, taught them how to farm and fish, and pretty much paved their path to early success. The Pilgrims were grateful, and to celebrate their first harvest, the 53 survivors of the original Mayflower contingent, just 4 of them women. Fucking yikes. Joined 90 of Massasoit's men, and in a 3-day feast of fowl, Indian corn, barley, peas, squash, shellfish, and venison. It's a heartwarming tale, and for the most part, it's true. Documents confirm that, a small group of pilgrims did indeed celebrate a harvest festival with some of the local natives at the start of their second year in the New World. But that celebration was never called Thanksgiving, nor did it become a ritually celebrated with any sort of regularity. Instead, the first, quote, official Thanksgiving, which is much less idyllic, more accurately reflects the tenuous relationship between white settlers and Native Americans that characterized America's settlement, colonization. But you probably didn't learn this from Thanksgiving in grade school. It came 16 years after the Puritans' first winter, when the Massachusetts Bay Governor William Bradford designated a, quote, day of Thanksgiving kept in all the churches for our victories against the Pequots? That doesn't sound to me very fucking bucolic and lovey,
Right, right, yeah.
touchy-feely. And the only natives present were those taken captive during the bloody raid that preceded it. The Pequot Massacre, as it's known, and I've also heard it called the Mystic Massacre for the area that it was called in near Mystic, what is now Mystic, Connecticut. The Pequot Massacre, as it's known, took place on May 26th, 1637, and was the coup de grace that capped nearly 4 years of skirmishes between the Pequot Nation, a tribe of approximately 8,000 that spanned most of Connecticut, and a coalition of 4 early colonies and their native allies. What started as an isolated trading dispute escalated when Western Niantic allies of the Pequot murdered a notorious English privateer named John Stone and his crew in retaliation for a separate attack that killed the Pequot chief Tatoham. In July of 1636, the previous year, the murder of a second English trader committed by the Narragansett Indians and wrongfully blamed on the Pequot sparked a series of Puritan raids and native retaliatory strikes that continued through the spring of 1637. So again, just to kind of back out of the article for a second, I mean, obviously the Puritans. And also, there's something to be said, which we're not going to talk about now, and we can, get into this at another time, or you can do your own independent research, to the Dutch as well, trading up and down the Hudson River, which I think we talked about last year, if I'm not mistaken. Shane, you were talking about that, and the fur trade. There was so much tumult introduced by these, European colonists and fur trades and the kind of, I don't know, the weird makeshift mint of the use of wampum and the trade thereof and use of that as currency. European colonists, in no other way to say it, introduced an enormous amount of tumult and pain with just their sheer presence here. So anyway, getting back to this. On the day of the massacre, 2 colonial officers, Captain John Mason from Connecticut and Captain John Underhill from the Massachusetts Bay Colony, led a group of several hundred men, including a contingent of Narragansett and Mohegan warriors, to the Pequot settlement in modern-day Mystic, Connecticut. Just before dawn, they attacked, and after being repelled by the inhabitants, they decided that instead of taking the village, they would simply burn it. The men set alight some 80 huts housing roughly 800 inhabitants and ambushed those who tried to escape, killing them with rifle shots. Those Pequot, quote, lucky enough to survive the initial volley were hacked or clubbed to death by the Narragansett and Mohegan warriors who, according to Captain Underhill, remarked disapprovingly on the ferocity of the English assault, saying, it is not, because it is too furious and slays too many men." I should mention too what's not mentioned in this article, and it was something else that I had learned from some other pieces that I had read about this, is that the English sailed their ships down to the coast of what's now Connecticut and made it look like they were retreating to the Pequots, but they then landed in what is now modern day Rhode Island and snuck in across the border from Narragansett territory into the Pequot territory as a sort of ruse to make it seem like there was not an attack coming, when in fact they were coming there expressly to brutalize the Pequot Nation. Governor Bradford described the massacre in his History of Plymouth Plantation, saying, and I'm going to try to read this without stuttering because it's all fucking oldie-timey English shit. It says,
you got it, man. You got it.
Yeah, appreciate it, man. you always support me with this.
Sure.
I appreciate
You got to
it.
lift your bros up.
Those that scraped the fire were slain with the sword, some hewed to pieces, others thrown with their rapiers, so as they were quickly dispatched, and very few escaped. It was conceived they thus destroyed about 400 at this time. It was a fearful sight to see them thus frying in the fire, and the streams of blood quenching the same, and horrible was the stink and scent thereof. But the victory seemed a sweet sacrifice, and they gave the prayers thereof to God, who had wrought so wonderfully for them, thus to enclose their enemies in their hands, and give them so speedy a victory over so proud and insulting an enemy. How fucking sick is that? And what this doesn't say is this entire murder, this massacre, not only did it kill 1/3 of the Pequot Nation, they killed 1/3 of the Pequot Nation in 1 hour.
Ah,
Wow.
This all took place in the span of 1 hour. And again, what's not talked about directly in this article is that like the Puritans, before they went into the village, and again in the middle of the night, before dawn, when everybody was sleeping, they like prayed as if, and again he alludes, Governor Bradford alludes to this in what he's saying there, saying as if this was ordained by God, that it was God himself that wanted these people dead, and it made it, burning these people alive was a boon for the colonists on behalf of God himself, like as if it was a fucking divine event, which I find, obviously, again, like I said, the fucking Puritans were fucking wackos. Like even the Dutch didn't want them. I mean, like, fucking come on. It continues here saying Bradford's estimates proved low, and it is now believed that as many as 700 Pequot died that day, most of whom were women and children.
Mm-hmm.
In the aftermath of the siege, survivors were hunted down and slain or sold into slavery, amounting to what was, for all intents and purposes, an ethnic cleansing of the tribe. The English even went so far as to outlaw the name Pequot. The tribe held on by a thread, and today there are approximately 1,500 members living in southeastern Connecticut. For decades after the Pequot massacre, annual religious ceremonies and Thanksgiving fast days were dedicated in its memory. In his book, New England Frontier, Puritans and Indians, 1620 to 1675, the historian Alden T. Vaughan called the Pequot War a game changer that had a profound effect on the nature of English-Native American relations. He said here, overnight the balance of power had shifted from the populous but unorganized natives to the English colonies. The destruction of the Pequots cleared away the only major obstacle to Puritan expansion, and the thoroughness of that destruction made a deep impression on other tribes. Since 1970, Native Americans have gathered every Thanksgiving around Coles Hill at Plymouth Rock for a national day of mourning to remember the Pequot and what happened to them in 1637. This Thanksgiving, before we dig into the bounty this nation has given us, again, I don't fucking know about this, but let's all take a moment to mourn with them and remember that there are two sides to every story. Which to me, fucking, I don't know who, Christopher Moroff is that wrote this, but like, I don't know, I wouldn't have read that last sentence. Or I wouldn't have written that last sentence. I mean, that's the crux of the story. I mean, to put a cap in it. I mean, and again, put this into context and realize that in addition to this, what ended up happening, later was that 75 to 90%, depending on, obviously historical counts and all that stuff, 75 to 90% of coastal New England Native Americans were killed by disease brought by the Puritans.
Yeah.
Just to think about an act like this, and the kind of celebratory manner in which the governors and of the nascent Connecticut colonies and Massachusetts colonies and stuff viewed this as a boon, as a good thing, as a kind of like an obstacle tackled, a hurdle jumped over, to say that this relatively strong group of people are an obstacle in our way to divine dominion over this new world that allowed them to carry out this a horror that we hope that we never truly appreciate firsthand.
Yeah.
It blows my mind that this, out of this horror is born this sort of like celebratory thing, which we all eat the ocean spray, fucking cranberry sauce and shit like that. It's all whatever. But I couldn't believe this as I was reading this, and I recommend anybody that is listening and is really appreciating how horrible this moment was in let's just say North American history, to go from this to our understanding of the holiday that it is today. It just fucking blows my mind. It blows my mind. I hope that's not too long-winded, but that's the story of the Pequot massacre.
Well, luckily that was the last time the colonists
engaged
in that sort of behavior.
It's been smooth sailing ever since.
Jesus Christ. Fucking sick.
It's all bad. Like when you look at the history of this, obviously, that's sort of the easy, right, like read on it. It's just bad. But getting into the details of it is important. Because ultimately, as you were saying, and I think your anecdote pointed to, Dwight, right, like Thanksgiving is like you know, like any other holiday, it's ostensibly like a commemorative thing, right? It's like what you're supposed to remember something or be reminded of something. And, you know, thinking about what that actually means and what that looks like and how it's been whitewashed is really important. I mean, my bit, there's a couple of things I wanted to talk about, and the first is kind of building off like what you were saying in terms of when was it like officially like sanctioned? How did these things, you know, how did these events happen? Thanksgiving, as we know it, was sort of informally celebrated a lot in the early colonies, like subsequent to the time period you were talking about. And the first like kind of official public recognition of it as a holiday was actually by George Washington in 1789, you know, right at the precipice of the new republic, and he made some speech about it or whatever, about how it was an important thing to commemorate and do. And interestingly, right, it's just amusing to me because this is another thing that's not really talked about. Everybody knows Washington as like, you know, the Virginia plantation slave owning general who was like the leader of the Continental Army, and led the American rebels to victory and to, you know, to the creation of the United States properly. But the reason why he had military experience to begin with, to be named general, is he had a lot of experience in the British colonial army in the in the early, you know, pre-United States, North America. And his career, his like, you know, the thing that gave him the quote unquote credentials to do it is he had fought in the French Indian War, which is also sometimes called the 7 Years' War. It depends sort of where you're from, but this was a war that was fought between the British and the French mostly, and basically over a dispute of the Ohio Territory, which at the time was not just what we now think of as Ohio, but included like Western Pennsylvania, Northwestern New York. And it was a dispute about like,
so,
you know,
Ohio-style war, so to speak.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
And interestingly,
there you go.
Interestingly, I didn't really realize this, but George Washington started the war. He was like 20 years old, and, you know, there were just like a lot of colonial conflicts between colonial powers. He was just like in the same area as some French with, you know, his like band of troops, and he like attacked them. And the reason why it's called the French Indian War and why I'm bringing it up now is because, you know, native tribes, right, were basically enlisted by both sides, by the French and the British, to participate in the war and fight with each other. So in the American context, we ended up calling it the French Indian War because the perception was like those were the groups that we were fighting, right? Because even though there were tribes on both sides, there were a lot more on the French side. Of course, the British won. That's how British Canada took over French Canada, for example. We kind of pushed them all out. But you know, I was looking into it. I mean, this is really rarely talked about because it's pre-Revolutionary War, but like obviously a lot of natives died in this war. And one of the big conclusions of it was with the loss of the French, who were somewhat more, you know, evil European colonizers in their own right, but were somewhat more like live and let live with the natives because they were more interested in trade than necessarily like building out that like you know, expansionist empire. With the British victory, it basically meant like unchecked British settlers were now just going to pour through and come in. And so it was sort of one of the beginnings of the end of the idea of a lot of those tribes being able to retain autonomy and sovereignty and stuff. So anyway, I just wanted to bring that up very briefly. But yeah. So again, then like Washington, once, you know, he becomes the great war hero, he becomes the first president. And he makes this official proclamation about Thanksgiving, but apparently it was like really touch and go. Like I think like Jefferson like hated Thanksgiving for whatever weird reason Jefferson had. So like
he was a douche.
He refused to like celebrate it. So it was basically like sometimes it was a holiday and sometimes it wasn't. And it didn't officially become a federal holiday until the Civil War, when President Lincoln proclaimed it in 1863. And the logic, the way that he put out this like declaration. I was considering reading it, but it's like really fucking boring. And it's the idea behind it was like, you know, in the middle of the Civil War, we need to find time to come together and be thankful for whatever, you know, like some wartime speech. that was the logic, like the country has to heal kind of idea.
Oh boy,
so that
where
was-
have I heard that before?
So that was November 26, 1863. And almost exactly a year later, on November 29th, 1864, was one of the, if not the single worst massacre by of the United States Army of native tribes. And civilians, right? And this is sort of a disputed claim. I don't know, how much it matters. I'll get into the actual numbers of dead later. It's people say it one way or another. It's usually considered within, I think, the United States' own records that this is the worst one. Of course, you have all the general other, kind of frontier Indian wars that went on forever, and some of those battles might have had a higher body count, but this was not a battle at all. This was a massacre, and it happened in Colorado. It's a place called Sand Creek. And the American soldier who led this massacre was this guy, Colonel John Milton Shivington. And I wanted to talk about him very briefly. So he was born in Ohio in 1821, and his dad, Isaac Shivington, had fought in the United States Army against members of Tecumseh's Confederacy. So he basically came from a line of a military family that had fought and massacred Indians. And so he grew up, he became a Mason and a Methodist minister, and he became a preacher, and he was going out west then to preach. He was in Nebraska for a while, I think. And then eventually in 1860, he moved with his family to the Colorado Territory, and he settled in Denver. This is sort of starting to set the stage of what eventually will become this massacre. So why did he move in 1860? Now, a little background on the Colorado Territory and this, this whole area. So as we know, without getting too much into the weeds, right, the whole project of fucking Manifest Destiny and the westward push was one of continual colonial expansion that was tied with this, obvious genocidal settler colonialism, where basically people just keep pushing the indigenous peoples back further and further west, right? And we all know about this, these great moments of removal, resettling different Indian tribes in different places. And so most of in the Colorado Territory, right, in 1851, the government signed a treaty with a bunch of the Indian tribes there that basically granted a certain territorial boundary to them. Now, of course, it's so fucked up, the idea that they granted the territory to them. This is where the people had been living and shit. But they basically drew out this, this big chunk of land and was okay, this is where, you can have your sovereignty and your autonomy, and we won't enter into it. And this territory was pretty big, and it incorporated large parts of what is now Wyoming, Nebraska, Kansas, and Colorado. And so already this was kind of a limitation of what the the previous treaties and stuff had done. But this was the Treaty of Fort Laramie, 1851. They gave them this, they said, okay, we won't interfere in this land. Of course, white settlers still would go into that land. 7 years after the treaty was signed, in 1858, one of these settlers found gold in the Colorado Territory. And so obviously, then what happens, right?
Oh boy.
You have a gold rush. And so then tons and tons and tons of people are started moving in. And so that leads then to them cut another deal with the various tribal leaders in 1861 called the Treaty of Fort Wise, where they basically, that whole big chunk that I just described that was, the size of 4 different states, got cut down to 1/13 of its size.
Jesus.
So in the span of 10 years, they, just totally lied, and it was really just the drive for gold. And so why I think that's important to mention is, again, 1858 is when the gold is discovered and the gold rush starts. It's 2 years later that this Methodist minister, John Shivington, moves to Colorado. So I wonder why. I wonder why he decided to make his move at that particular time, right?
Fuck.
So then what ends up happening? Well, there's a split. There's a obviously, as always happens with these kinds of scenarios, you have people on the tribal side, right? And the American Indians, right? There's the leaders, the elders who sign this treaty, right? Trying to maintain some semblance of peace. And among them are these 2 guys, these Cheyenne Indians named Black Kettle and White Antelope. They were tribal leaders. And they'll come up, unfortunately, later in this story. But there was a whole other faction of Cheyenne called they called themselves the Dog Soldiers. that had kind of formed a few years earlier and split off and made their own kind of faction of the tribe. And again, if I get any of this wrong, I apologize in advance. I was trying to, in as general terms, explain it and understand it myself. But these guys, the dog soldiers, were basically like, there's no point in making peace with the white man because they're just going to keep fucking lying to you and keep stealing your land, which is like true. Like that is what happened. And so the dog soldiers refused to adhere to the treaty. And as a result, they would attack caravans of white settlers and stuff who were moving into this new territory that, apparently the U.S. government was saying, like, it's okay, you can move here now, right? And a lot of people are trying to do that to find gold. Now, all of this coincides, right? 1861, this is also the beginning of the Civil War. But anyway, so, the dog soldiers... because there wasn't maybe that kind of federal military support that sometimes the settlers had, were quite successful in their raids. And as a consequence, there were all these stories that then started circulating in the press, and you can imagine how they went, racist white people getting attacked by Indian warriors, and then, writing up like these horror stories and stuff in the press. And so there was a lot of like fever about this. And so it was around this time that Shivington, again, this Methodist minister, joins the volunteer like army in Colorado, right? And so this goes on for like a couple of years, right? This sort of there are these back and forth, there are these small skirmishes in this territory, and eventually, right, the governor of the Colorado Territory, Governor Evans, sends out like sort of peace feelers, right, and basically is like, let's talk. Let's try to settle this. And as a result, eventually in 1864, in September, he gets a bunch of the various leaders of the different tribes and stuff that are there. It's mostly Cheyenne, but there's also Arapaho Indians there as well. And so a number of representatives from those tribes come to Denver, and they all have this big get-together in September 1864. And they're there like, okay, let's like try to discuss peace. And again, a lot of these guys were the people who had signed these treaties already, right? These were the people that were sort of more on board with the idea of like, let's try to have like a live and let live thing. When they actually get there, the governor basically says like, actually, we're not going to have peace. And he says directly to them, quote, "The time when you can make war best is in the summer. When I can make war best is in the winter. You, so far, have had the advantage. My time is just coming." And he basically says, like, there can't be peace, but we'll cut a deal with you. We understand that there's, like, there's two groups of, two sort of political factions at play here. One that wants to raid us and continue war with us, and one that wants to do the live and let live. If you guys come to our forts, we'll protect you, and we'll make sure that you're not any of the groups that we're then going to make war on when the winter comes. And
Jesus
so
Christ.
A number of the people who are present there, a number of the chiefs, agree to this, and they start to, over the next month or two, start to bring their tribes, their groups of people, and the people will come with them to these forts for protection. And so at one point, again, these two chieftains, Black Kettle and White Antelope, they take a few hundred of their people. Again, the exact numbers are not clear. There's different reports of this. But they take a few hundred of their people, again, mostly Cheyenne, but some Arapaho, and they go to this place, Fort Lyon, U.S. military fort set up there. When they get to the fort, after like a day, they're told that you have to leave because you're like too unruly, right? We don't want you around here, but we'll still protect you. You just have to go to this place that's like about 40 miles away called Sand Creek. So if you go there, we'll know that you're there, and we'll like keep you on the protected list, right? And so they move their whole tribal group over there. Then what happens? This guy Shivington shows up. He's now in the Colorado Cavalry. He's thoroughly hates the native population. I have a quote from him here to give you a sense of the kind of guy this was. He says, "Damn any man who sympathizes with Indians. I have come to kill Indians and believe it is right and honorable to use any means under God's heaven to kill Indians. Kill and scalp all, big and little, nits make lice." End quote.
Wow-wee.
Again, this is a preacher. This is supposedly like a man of God.
Christ.
So he leads a group of about 600 or 700 cavalrymen under his command, including like, artillery and cannons and stuff. and basically comes to the group at Sand Creek. And the long and short of it, obviously, is they just open fire on this group. It's mostly women and children, old men. It's like these are explicitly the people who are like, we don't want to fight you, and we're willing to talk with you, even after being lied to, like just in the last like 15 years, like multiple times. The people who tried to sign the treaty. And so they get massacred. Again, numbers are differing. Shivington himself claims this is a great victory. He says, I killed like 500 to 600 Indian warriors. That was his count. Of course, again, it's a lie. Most of them were women and children or older men. There are other accounts that are more in the 100 range, but somewhere between 1 and 500, let's say, people are massacred. Obviously, there are a lot of dead and a lot of other wounded. There's one eyewitness by one of the survivors of the Sand Creek Massacre named George Benton. And George Benton, he had a mixed parentage. One of his parents was, I believe his father was a white trader who had been trading with the Indians and stuff, and then his mother was Cheyenne, I think. And so he sort of hid out while the massacre was occurring, and he managed to survive. And then later he gives this testimony, and I'll explain the context for where he's giving this testimony. But I'll just read a bit of this. So this is George Benton describing what happens. Quote, when I looked toward the chief's lodge, I saw that Black Kettle had a large American flag up on a long lodge pole as a signal to the troops that the camp was friendly. Part of the warriors were running out towards the pony herds, and the rest of the people were rushing about the camp in great fear. All the time, Black Kettle kept calling out not to be frightened, that the camp was under protection, and that there was no danger. Then, suddenly, the troops opened fire on this mass of men, women, and children, and all began to scatter and run. The main body of Indians rushed up the bed of the creek, which was dry, level sand with only a few little pools of water here and there. On each side of this wide bed stood banks from 2 to 10 feet high. While the main body of the people fled up this dry bed, a part of the young men were trying to save the herd from the soldiers, and small parties were running in all directions toward the sand hills. One of these parties, made up of perhaps 10 middle-aged Cheyenne men, started for the sand hills west of the creek, and I joined them. Before we had gone far, the troops saw us and opened a heavy fire on us, forcing us to run back and take shelter in the bed of the creek. We now started up the stream bed, following the main body of Indians, and with a whole company of cavalry close on our heels, shooting at us every foot of the way. As we went along, we passed many Indians, men, women, and children, some wounded, others dead, lying on the sand and in the pools of water. Presently, we came to a place where the main party had stopped, and were now hiding in pits that they had dug in the high bank of the stream. Just as we reached this place, I was struck by a ball in the hip and badly wounded, but I managed to get into one of the pits. About these pits, nearly all Shivington's men had gathered, and more were continually coming up, for they had given up the pursuit of the small bodies of Indians who had fled to the sandhills. The soldiers concentrated their fire on the people in the pits, and we fought back as well as we could with guns and bows, but we only had a few guns. The troops did not rush in and fight hand to hand, but once or twice, after they had killed many of the men in a certain pit, they rushed in and finished up the work, killing the wounded and the women and the children that had not been hurt.
Fuck.
The fight was kept up until nearly sundown, when at last the commanding officer called off his men and all started back down the creek toward the camp that they had driven us from. As they went back, the soldiers scalped the dead lying in the bed of the stream and cut up the bodies in a manner that no Indian could equal. Little Bear told me recently that after the fight he saw the soldiers scalping the dead and saw an old woman who had been scalped by the soldiers walk about, but unable to see where to go. Her whole scalp had been taken, and the skin of her forehead fell down over her eyes.
What the fuck?
At the beginning of the attack, Black Kettle, with his wife and White Antelope, took their position before Black Kettle's lodge and remained there after all others had left the camp. At last, Black Kettle, seeing that it was useless to stay longer, started to run, calling out to White Antelope to follow him. But White Antelope refused and stood there ready to die with arms folded, singing his death song. Nothing lives long except the earth and the mountains, until he was shot down by the soldiers. So that one of the chiefs
Christ.
then again who had signed all of the peace treaties and had been working towards peace, just brutally murdered. And there's another detail here that from this historian Stan Hoig that I wanted to mention, and this is particularly gruesome, so I apologize, but I think it's important to illustrate, the savagery that's being committed in the course of all of this. As George Benton describes, like they were, they would scalp the Indians there. And even more, they would take trophies, obviously, right? And so this is a quote from Stan Hoig's, this historian's book on it. He says, fingers and ears were cut off the bodies for the jewelry they carried. The body of White Antelope, again, that's the chief, lying solitarily in the creek bed, was a prime target. Besides scalping him, the soldiers cut off his nose, ears, and testicles, the last for a tobacco pouch.
Oh my God.
So they mutilated this guy, and there's a bunch of stories about how then, like I said, they claim that this was like some big brave battle and action that they'd fought. A lot of these guys went back to like, the various towns and Colorado and stuff, and they'd like hang out at the bars and show this stuff off. Like, hey, look, here's the testicle sack of the great chief that I, so bravely fought and killed, when again, it was just like a peaceful man that they just shot out, for nothing, and then mutilated his corpse. There's a lot more like really horrible details out of this, but you get the point, and you can sort of fill in the rest of the gaps yourself. So why do we know about this? Why did George Benton give testimony? This was like, even by the American standard, right? This was such a horrific act that word got around about it, right? Because there were survivors. And again, there was like a guy like George Benton, who being half white, probably at that particularly racist time, could lend more credibility and legitimacy to this story of what had actually happened. And so eventually the guy who led this, Shivington, right, gets brought up as like in front of like essentially like a court martial. Like there's an investigation that's opened into his activities having done this. And it goes before Congress. And this happens in 1865 after the war. And they go through, a lot of people give testimony. Again, there's that guy, George Benton. There's a few other journalists and stuff who covered it, a few other eyewitnesses. They unequivocally agree, like, okay, yes, this is just like a war crime. There was no justification for this. But there's two factors at play. The first one is this is now at the end of the Civil War, and a general amnesty was just declared for any soldiers during the Civil War at that time. Because, they're trying to say, like, again, like, let's not look into the past.
Fog of war sort of thing.
Let's move forward, let's heal as a nation. So nobody could get in trouble for anything bad that they did during the war. Even though this had nothing to do with fighting the Confederacy or whatever, this was just like an independent action that this guy took because he was wearing the Union colors. He couldn't be touched. And then also, they couldn't strip him of anything because he decided, as this investigation started, to resign. He resigned his military post. So there was, like, literally nothing they could do, even though, again, they just announced, like, yeah, you're a horrible war criminal or whatever. He was like, okay. So then, like, he just got off scot-free. The one note I saw written a couple of places, that basically the only thing that this destroyed was his big political ambitions. Because I guess he had wanted to run for something afterwards. And so, unfortunately for him, he wasn't able to do that because he was this mass murdering fuckhead. He was a totally unrepentant guy, too. And I was just trying to find out interesting details about the rest of his life. He ended up being like a sheriff in some small town. They elected him sheriff in some like frontier town. And then interestingly, his son, who I guess owned like a farm or a ranch, at some point after the war, drowned. His like adult son drowned. So then this guy, Shivington, went to his like son's estate to manage it. And when he did that, his son's widow was there. And then the phrase that I saw used was he, quote, seduced his son's widow.
Oh.
And then basically married her. And again, this being like 1870, almost certainly that was not a seduction. And it was forceful, which is proven because then 10 years later, I guess at this point, Shivington's like really old. The wife successfully divorces him. His son's widow, who he forced to marry him. So all around real piece of work. And so, what does this have to do with the topic of the episode? Obviously, it's the general, looking at and kind of evaluating the way that the country and the federal government in particular has treated the indigenous peoples of North America over time, and there's one particularly heinous aspect of that. But it was just curious to me that like this was literally a year after the federal holiday of Thanksgiving was announced, like almost to the exact day. 1 year later was like what is officially considered by the U.S. military like the worst war, crime that they did against the Indians. Pretty horrible stuff. But yeah, Shivington, a name that you probably didn't know. Now you know.
Fuck. And
he got away with it. He was fine. He lived out the rest of his life to like ensnare his son's widow. It was a horrible man.
As you were saying this, I kept thinking, I'm like, how do these people like go back to like, you know, hold their grandchildren or something? You know what I'm saying? Like, how do they fucking adjust to normal life after committing some of the worst and most evil acts in human history? But the answer is like they're psychopaths. Like they're fucking crazy. Or they eat off lead plates. I don't even fucking like. I can't even imagine. Getting into a headspace where you brutalize innocent fucking people like this.
And again, I mean, it's an old hypocrisy to trot out, but it's worth bringing up here, especially in this case, is that the whole predication of like, you know, racism against, you know, any group, but in particular like the indigenous groups in North America by white people was always around the idea of like they're the uncivilized ones, right? Like they're savages and stuff. And like in this case, like he literally is saying, you know, and he's like a minister, and he's like, you know, no, we have to like scalp them. We have to treat them with like utter brutality. And you have guys like mutilating bodies to like show trophies. Like what is civilization then? Right? Like what are you trying to protect? You know, what way of life are you trying to promote and expand if that's the method that you're doing it on? Again, an old hypocrisy, but it's one of the fundamental ones that this country was founded on. And it's worth, you know, bearing in mind.
What a fucking... You start to match that up again, like, you know, we were talking about earlier, like match that up with the just straight lies that are taught, you know, in schools to children about the origins of this country. Just straight lies.
Right.
And, you know, like, you know, on the one hand, you know, there is an age appropriate thing. You don't want to like, you know, ideally don't want to traumatize children like, because this subject matter is extremely distressing, but like, you can't on the same token, you can't fucking just, you know, put rose-colored glasses, you know, in the rearview mirror and, oh Jesus, this is fucking sick, Shane. I can't believe that. Ooh, I need a fucking breather after that one.
It sucks.
It sucks. It sucks. Wow. Well, I suppose we should move on. Chris, we're in your hands, buddy.
Yo, that's good luck, man. Good luck. I mean, sure, you know, in taking a break from all the doom and gloom of the past 2 hours, this episode and the Patreon episode was spoiler. It's all completely about COVID almost. But so, you know, certainly, our listeners, as you're hearing this, you're thinking, well, you know, it's a good thing all of those atrocities against the indigenous people are at least all in the past, right? We're not doing that sort of thing anymore, right? But, I mean, obviously, as with, like, pretty much every other non-white group in the country, rates of COVID infections are far higher among Native American communities, especially if you live on a reservation. And, I mean, rates of infection are higher, but also, like, your likelihood of death is also higher due to all of the disproportionately higher rates of pre-existing conditions that people have, same as in Black communities, same as in Hispanic communities, you know, due to the structural issues that they already face in this country, having diabetes and heart disease and obesity and all these sorts of things, and you know, not so good access to adequate nutrition. You know, many of these reservations are in food deserts and stuff like that. So if you're a Native American in this country, I believe either on a reservation or not, you're 2.8 times more likely to become infected than a white person. If you do get infected, you're 5.3 times more likely to need to be hospitalized because of, you know, like I said, all of those sort of pre-existing conditions that Native people have a you know, disproportionately high rates of, and you're also 1.4 times more likely to die. Currently, you know, like we just talked about in the Patreon episode, but, you know, currently, at least per capita, like the highest, you know, there's not so many people there, but like the Great Plains region, like North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, places like that are like have some of the highest rates of infection in the country right now. So among Native Americans, like within the Great Plains region, which is, you know, where the Dakotas are, so like among Native Americans, it's a 25% positivity rate among people there who are tested. And this is anecdotal and this may be meaningless, but I can't help but think about this because like I think about like the bikers I've known, like the fake biker, like the type of people who like the type of people I know who go to Sturgis, who I know go to Sturgis. They're all like weirdly, like they're all like big conservatives, but they're all also like into like Native American stuff. Like they all like turquoise jewelry. They like that like aesthetic. They like that they like that like cowboys and Indians aesthetic or whatever. Like they like that. So like it is then ironic that they all went to Sturgis and then like seeded this fucking like infection that is now disproportionately killing the native, the indigenous people in the region.
Damn.
So that's, that's like the Great Plains Native Americans. The Navajo Nation, which like encompasses parts of northern Arizona and New Mexico and also a little bit of southern Utah. But the Navajo Nation, they had a pretty early and also pretty severe outbreak. Like they recorded their first case, like I think March 18th, like middle of March, like about the same time that like started blowing up in New York and stuff. And the Navajo Nation has a population of 173,000 people, 667. So as of today, they have 14,085 COVID cases. So that's one out of every 12 people that lives on the reservation has had COVID. One in every 281 people has died of COVID. That's not one out of every 281 that's gotten it. That's one out of every 281 people that live in the Navajo Nation has died of COVID since March. 1 in 22 cases there are fatal. So again, they have like a higher rate of, if you get it, you're more likely to die from it. And also what that probably tells you, those numbers, so many being fatal, is that there's probably not adequate testing. And also like another big troubling thing here is that you have, again, all those sort of pre-existing health conditions, all those structural issues. You also have like a higher rate of like multi-generational homes, right? So you have like, the elders living with, the rest of the family, a couple different generations. And also, so many of the revenue, like the jobs that the economies of these reservations are based on things like casinos and gas stations and liquor stores and stuff like tax-free, duty-free places for people passing through to buy cigarettes and gas and stuff and casinos. And so, all those same issues with like, why Black people are suffering from higher rates of COVID is because they're more likely to be in jobs in like public transportation or in, the service industry or something like that. Something where like, you are forced to be face-to-face with customers, right? And if you're not, then that's just it. You're not getting fucking a check. You're not getting, if you're out of work, you're just out of work. If your casino closed down, which many of these have had to close down, that's just that. You're just fucked. I mean, you get unemployment, but it's not very much, right?
No.
So, a few other things I looked up here because I was curious about, because I wanted to see just how deep the divide and just how deep that disparity is between current Native Americans and white people in this country. Life expectancy is about 3 years shorter overall.
Jesus.
If you live on a reservation, the median household income is $29,000. It's about $68,000 for whites. The national poverty rate for Native Americans nationwide is 25%. It's probably higher on reservations because people like Native Americans who live actually on reservations tend to be doing worse economically than people who don't live on them. In fact, I looked up some of these reservations have a median household income as low as like $11,000, $12,000, $13,000 a year.
Jeez, and what's the poverty line's like 20 something, right?
I think it's about 12,000 for an individual. I'm not sure
for an individual.
I'm not sure how much it is for a family.
Yeah, family of 4, it's 26,000.
Yeah.
How do you even fucking call for an individual 12,760? Like, what fucking planet?
Right.
Can you even afford to live?
I know
on that amount of money per fucking per year?
Yeah, man. So here's an article from the Huffington Post from I guess just yesterday, just a few days ago. This is about the severity of the COVID pandemic among the Dakota tribes up there. So I'll read from this here. It says the Republican governors leading the Dakotas have been criticized for not imposing a mask mandate earlier to prevent the spread of the coronavirus. In North Dakota, Governor Doug Burgum finally ordered a mask mandate last Saturday, after months of resistance. In South Dakota, Governor Kristi Noem continues to refuse to set a mask mandate. Kristi Noem, if you're not familiar, she's like very much she's in the mode of Trump. She's milking the Trump Sarah Palin thing. And if you go to any one of her tweets, you will see just dozens and dozens of embarrassingly horny conservative men in her replies.
Yes.
Yeah, as she's presiding over this like just fucking mass death in her state because she refuses to wear a mask or enforce anything, any sort of. I mean, South Dakota has not just one of the highest rates of infection in the country, has in the world one of the highest, like per capita. It's a sparsely populated country, state. It's a sparsely populated state, but and lots of people have it there. I think that they just crossed a couple days ago over 1 in 1,000 have died. People who live in the state have died of COVID now since it started. So 1 out of every 1,000 people who lived there when it started is now dead because of it. And this is as the governor, again, like I said, in the mold of the president, doesn't give a shit and is like posting things on Twitter of like her like hunting pheasant or some shit and says like this is how we social distance in South Dakota. It's just a joke. Anyway, so then it goes on to say hundreds of cases, like I said, have been linked to a 10-day motorcycle rally in August in Sturgis, where hundreds of thousands of attendees gathered, many of them maskless. Meanwhile, native tribes have been far stricter than state governments in setting rules to curb the virus's spread, including imposing mask mandates, curfews, and stay-home orders on their reservation. But tribes are far from isolated from the surrounding non-Indian populations. Yeah, so then it goes on to talk about how, natives still have to go off the reservations for necessities and stuff like that. So native people make up about 6% of North Dakota's population. And so like, it doesn't matter. I mean, as you've discovered, as we've discussed, it doesn't matter how good a job you and your community or your family or whatever are doing. If you have to go out in the world and all it takes is one asshole. And there's a lot of assholes out there. Again, like I said, especially if the governor and the president and the people that hold sway over them that they listen to tell them, make a big mockery out of it and tell them that they don't need to wear the mask. Again, like I said this on the Patreon, I'll say it again, the mask, and I'm probably preaching to the choir, anybody that listens to this show, but the mask, like, it's not for you. The mask is to keep other people from getting sick. So like if you, it seems like it's the bare minimum that if you value human life, you just wear. Why would you not just wear the fucking mask? It's outrageous to me.
I saw this little illustration just to like show it in a different way. It's like if two dudes are standing in front of each other and one guy pees on you, and you're both not wearing pants, you're gonna get piss on you. If you're wearing pants and he pees on you, there's some protection, but you're still gonna get fucking piss all over you. If he's wearing pants and he pisses, it's gonna be entirely encapsulated in his pants, and he's gonna get pissed.
Right.
How's that, Shane? Did you like that?
Yeah, it was good. That tickled my phony bone.
Okay.
Nice, man. I'm glad to hear it. This has been a bit of a somber one.
It is. Yeah.
So yeah, the article goes on. It talks about like the food deserts thing that I just talked about, and also how like the USDA programs that they would use to like distribute food to reservations. They did this all through like the 90s and stuff. There's like very, very low quality foods, high in fat, like a lack of fruits and vegetables, high levels of sodium, high levels of sugar, stuff like that, led to all these sort of underlying health problems that are now causing people to die at a higher rate because of COVID. And again, against the precautions that they themselves are trying to take amongst themselves because they see the seriousness. I don't know if you saw this, Dwight. You're in New York. The Shinnecock Reservation in Suffolk County.
Yeah, dude.
They did a good job. I think they only had this was back in the summer, and I'm not sure currently, but like that original wave that hit Long Island, like they really shut her down. And among their tribe, they had 3 cases and no deaths. There's 3 cases overall.
It's pretty remarkable, honestly.
So yeah, kudos to them, especially the fact that like as soon as the fucking virus hit, every rich asshole with a house in the Hamptons took their fucking private helicopter out there and immediately like seeded this fucking mass infection of the Hamptons. Which, if you're not familiar with anybody listening, if you're not familiar with Long Island, the Shinnecock Reservation is in the Hamptons. It's in the very very wealthy eastern end of Suffolk County.
And even on a normal year, they're surrounded by the fucking
worst,
the Trump psychos,
the
Blue
worst,
Lives Matter,
man. God bless them, man.
Karens just spitting in their faces, being like, I it's my right not to wear a mask.
Yeah.
Fucking hell.
So yeah, so then it goes on to talk about in addition to everything else, the lack of space in hospitals and the inadequacy of like the hospitals on the reservations are provided to the people there. It's the hospital in Standing Rock Reservation is outdated, has limited staff, has few ventilators. Hospitals. This is in the Dakotas. Hospitals are already nearing capacity there, so they're already starting to like send patients. Like if their hospital can't take them, they send patients from the hospital to like they may have to go to Fargo, 3 or 4 hours away. Like they may be the nearest hospital they can go to, and some people like they have to like medevac them. It's like if it's a serious case, it's they may not have 4 hours before you can get on a ventilator. They might not make it.
That's not having healthcare. Right. That's just not having healthcare. That's not, and I don't mean like affordability. That's just literally it does not exist.
Sure. Yeah. So, yeah, he goes on to then talk about, like I was saying, about how hard like they've been hit economically, like in that so many of their economies depend on, again, like I said, like a service industry thing, like a casino or a gas station or a cigarette store or a liquor store or something. Like so many of these reservations, that's like the main driver of their economy. And it's all obviously like a casino, especially. I mean, these sorts of things are, they shut down originally. If they're opened up back now, almost certainly they're not as frequented as they were prior to the pandemic. So that's taking a huge hit out of people's resources that they have to, if they were to get sick or whatever. Here's an interesting thing. I didn't know this. I found this buried at the bottom of this article. This article links to another article from the Huffington Post from back in April 2nd. And the headline is, "The White House wanted to give $0 to tribes in the $2 trillion stimulus bill." And
what?
So, yeah, it starts off, it says, in the end, tribes got about $10 billion out of the emergency $2 trillion stimulus bill that President Trump signed into law last Friday. So this is back in end of March. This was that $1,200 check everybody got. Although I think some people still haven't gotten theirs. But, out of the $2 trillion allocated for this stimulus package, it says, but if the White House had its way, tribes wouldn't have gotten a penny in direct relief, according to 3 Senate Democratic aides familiar with negotiations on the bill. And if Senate Republicans had their way, tribes would have gotten way less than they got. The National Congress of American Indians, the largest organization representing the interests of tribal governments and communities, told Congress in mid-March that the nation's 574 tribes would need at least $20 billion in direct federal relief to stem job losses and economic instability caused by the coronavirus pandemic. So, yeah, originally, like I said, the White House declined to give them anything at all. They ended up giving them $10 billion, as we all know. I mean, overall, it was woefully inadequate for everybody, for all of us.
Yes.
But the tribes, like I said, very, very, very nearly got nothing. And it's maybe I'll link it, and maybe we can link it in the description or something. But I've seen there's been some articles that are rather moving, especially about the Shinnecock Reservation and just like the amount of like mutual aid and like looking out for their own and taking care of each other and pooling resources and like making it so that people don't have to go off the reservations, like providing people necessities like toilet paper and paper towels and groceries and all that, like having a food bank on the reservation, all those sorts of things to, to keep people safe and keep them from having to, go to the 7-Eleven and get fucking spit on by like a retired Suffolk County cop or something and then get COVID,
What a fucking concept that people would be given the things that they need during, one of the worst, national disasters in a generation.
Right. So, that's really the long and short of it. But, I mean, it goes to show, and you have to search for this. You have to search for this information. Like, no, there's no, this is not, like I said, I've been watching very shamefully way more cable news than I'm proud to admit right now. And I'm pretty plugged into the mainstream news or whatever right now. And there's nothing about this. Nobody talks about this. Occasionally you see a story about how black communities are, disproportionately affected, stuff like that. But as always, the indigenous population is completely written off, as always, as they always have been. But they've been, like I said, hit far harder than the rest of us. And
go ahead, Shane.
Well, I was gonna say, the other obvious, point of connection here, and I think Dwight, you mentioned this early on, is that most of the indigenous people of the Americas to begin with were wiped out by germs and pathogens brought
exactly
by the colonists, and then of course we know. throughout the 19th century, right, with the whole like kind of project of reservations and stuff being constructed, as the territory that we basically allowed the indigenous population to live on got smaller and smaller and smaller. There were also then like the deliberate moves of infecting these communities with smallpox and stuff, and other diseases, and it's just like, this is unfortunately a continuation of that history, right? Like, it's a continuation of in so many ways these people get fucked over over and over and over again by the same government, as much as we like to, as you very aptly put, Chris, as much as we like to imagine that, okay, these are like historical things, like this was a historical crime that happened, or a series of crimes, and but luckily, like, that's kind of over now, or we're in a better place now, right? Like, obviously that's not the case. It's just not.
It's neo-colonialism. It's a fucking contemporaneous fucking genocide. I'm so struck by this. Oh, Jesus Christ.
Well, it shows you as well, too, like we've talked about many times, like we just recently talked about, like when we talked about the McCloskeys in St. Louis, like these just a few generations of, like, I mean, this was a genocide that, like you talked about earlier in the episode, with the bulk of this was done centuries ago. Right. But it's just like just the lingering, just like the structural, just the way everything has been set up since then. It's like, it's so hard to undo that if you're not making any effort to undo that injustice that's been done. You can't just say that, like, okay, fucking rugged individualism, you're fine now, you're on your own, like you can do whatever you want, you have all the freedom you want to do, but that's not enough, because it's inadequate to handle the centuries of abuse like that.
Yeah. I mean, look, obviously, like, one of the, firstly, there is no solution, there is no undoing, like, the horrors of the past, but you can do fucking robust reparations.
Yes,
like,
yes.
At the least.
Yes.
At the least. And it would not be unreasonable to do so. We just did it en masse for every fucking, large and, mid-cap corporation in the country. Just like... Right. How quickly it was done too. So, like, what the fuck is the big deal with this then? We learned this year that printing money does not increase inflation. So just fucking make more money. Just give people money. Give people the things that they need to do to live, to have a dignity of life that you should deserve by virtue of the fact that you were born as a Homo sapiens. Like, there's no other qualifying factor other than the fact that you were born a human that should allow you to afford a life of dignity. Incredible. It's just an abject failure.
Just give them all of the land back.
Yeah.
Just all of it.
All of it, sure.
Eat the Rich is going to be fine. We're going to go to fucking Sealand and start our own, like, weird micronation.
Move all the white settlers in North America to Sealand. No masks.
Start our pirate
no
radio
phones.
We're going to start our offshore pirate radio station, probably get, like, tanked by the CIA, and that's fine. We've had a good run.
I think, like, the other thing to throw in here and maybe working towards as like a wrap up, right, is like, even there's stuff in the course of the show, like, and for example, the bits that you guys brought to it, the thing that I read for today, like, I didn't know about these specific things, but I know that story. If you have a critical mind, especially if you're in a leftist direction or whatever in your politics, or at least sort of even like a liberal critical one, you have a sense of like, okay, these were really horrible things that happened, right, and they're very bad, and so, like, this shit, often comes up every year, and it comes up now because there's an even kind of greater highlight on it, given everything else is going on. It's like, what does this mean then about a holiday like Thanksgiving, right? Like there's that like reflective defense that like conservatives have, where they're like, they're trying to cancel Thanksgiving, they're the war on Thanksgiving, and it's like, first of all, like, who gives a shit? Me personally, like, who cares? But at the same time, having this knowledge also doesn't mean that, like, I don't know, you personally are an evil person if you like eat turkey or whatever on Thanksgiving, or like try to have like a moment of relaxation, like the day off work, right? Like on its own can be somewhat of a relief. So I don't know. It's one of those things you have to navigate and you have to figure out for yourself, I guess. I mean, I would also, to be clear, I'm agnostic on it in the level of like, I would be fine with canceling Thanksgiving or calling it something else. You know, like, I don't give a shit. You know, you can also eat mashed potatoes on any day.
Yes.
They're amazing. They're so good. Any day you want, you can have mashed potatoes and gravy.
Yeah,
so
for the record, I mean, you know, U.S. workers are grossly underserved by the, you know, severe lack of federal holidays that we have.
Right.
We won't even have one for a fucking election. Like, are you fucking serious? We should easily, we could foist in like at least 4 more days off just on a federal level per year just to have. I don't think we should take away this holiday, but on the same time, like, to celebrate it with a veneer of like, oh yeah, there's togetherness, you know, between, you know, white colonizers and the, you know, the native population that was genocided and brutalized and you know, it's don't fucking kid yourself, and don't gaslight children that they have to fucking learn about it. You know what I'm saying? That they have to learn about it, you know, decades later and like feel this sort of do this unlearning. It's unproductive.
It's also, I mean, through the vector of capitalism, you know, this holiday, like pretty much every other one in the American context, at least, because there are like other Thanksgivings, like other countries celebrate. You know, I think Canada has a similar weird one that's like mixed up in, you know, whatever colonial era stuff. But like there are other countries that celebrate some kind of like harvest festival, which is basically what it is. But through the vector of capitalism, it just becomes like a commercial entity like anything else, right? It's not like, you know, any semblance of even it having a history is just so that they, you know, like at fucking CVS they can sell like plastic turkeys and like the stupid little black plastic pilgrim hat things that you could put on your wall or whatever.
Black Friday, man, who could forget? Dude?
Right,
That's the big
Oh,
one.
dude,
yeah,
yeah.
it's the start. Thanksgiving's the start of the shopping season, baby.
Yeah, so it doesn't really even have that meaning. And so for, you know, in that sense, I think it's like fine, you know, like in that kind of just sense of like, oh, it's just a time you get together and you know, you see people or whatever, which again, I don't even care about. Zero interest at all in at any moment seeing anyone. So I'm fine with it existing or it not existing or whatever. But like, yeah, I think you're right, Dwight, where it's like you can shed the pretensions that this has some like great national meeting and just be like, okay, you know, it's more of like a community focused thing, right? It's like people come together, you cook together, you know, you have the day off and the next day off, maybe you see people you haven't seen in a while or that kind of thing.
Yeah,
that's fine. But again, also like I'm fine with canceling it. I want to be clear, all holidays, who gives a shit? Why do you celebrate anything? Life is misery.
I'm declaring war on Thanksgiving. Oh, it's official. Yeah, I know. Like you said, Fox News has been talking about it, but yeah, no.
Oh shit!
It's over. We're done with it. Thanksgiving is canceled. We're done with it.
I just realized Trump's got a part in the turkey this year. Maybe he just won't. Because he's so depressed because of the election
sad.
stuff.
He's a sad boy.
He's like,
He's
you
a
know what?
small
I
bean.
decided. I saw that turkey. He deserves it.
Give me the knife. I was imagining Trump like Anton Chigurh with the fucking like pneumatic fucking like with the thing that he started the animals with, like with the turkey, just like. Oh yeah, dude.
Please look here, sir.
What good were the rules if this is where it led you? Turkey.
All right, that's enough.
Yeah, that's enough. Happy Thanksgiving, everybody.
Happy Thanksgiving, everybody.
Happy Thanksgiving.
No happiness for me, but I will acknowledge that you're listening.
Bah humbug from Shano. Stay cool. Stay cool.
All right, take it easy.
Cool.
All right, take it easy.
Cool.
All right, take it easy.
Cool.
All right, take it easy.